Breaking news about Bobiwine. Illegal police and military siege. This is from CNN, Al Jazeera and Amnesty International. First, an article from CNN. EU and US call for probe into Uganda. Election violence as Bobi Wine remains under house arrest. The European Union has joined a growing number of international voices calling for a probe into Ugandan election abuses and violence that left more than 40 people dead in the lead-up to the polls. Opposition candidates were harassed by security forces, the media was suppressed by the government, and observers' offices were raided, said the EU Council of Ministers in a statement on Wednesday. It called on all parties to refrain from violence and for election challenges and complaints to be addressed in an independent and transparent manner. Uganda's longtime leader President Yoweri Museveni was declared the winner for a record sixth term, amid an internet blackout and allegations of abuse. Wine, a singer-turned-politician, whose real name is Robert Kyagulanyi, has been under house arrest after the military surrounded his home on Friday. He maintains the election was rigged. "I thank all friends in Uganda and abroad who continue to stand with us until we put an end to this indignity," he said in a tweet on Thursday. The 18-month-old niece of Wine's wife, Barbara Itungo Kyagulanyi, is in the residence and her father has been denied access because nobody is allowed to leave or come into the compound, Wine said on Twitter. Human rights groups spoke out against Wine's detention and the political climate in the country as President Museveni embarked on an election victory tour of the country Thursday. "It is neither a crime to stand for president nor to want to challenge the election results in court," said the regional director of the human rights NGO, Deprose Muchina, in a statement. "This continued confinement is politically motivated and a blatant violation of their human rights. It must be lifted immediately and without any conditions." In the weeks leading up to the election, there were several incidences of violence and human rights violations, said Human Rights Watch. The abuses included killings by security forces, arrests and beatings of opposition supporters and journalists, disruption of opposition rallies, and a shutdown of the internet, said the International Human Rights NGO in a statement. Museveni's senior press secretary, Don Wanyama, referred CNN to the police when contacted about Wine's house arrest, implying that the president knew nothing about the detention. "Why would he?" Wanyama said. "Stop Museveni saying everything. Talk to the police." The Ugandan police force did not immediately respond to requests for comment. The police said in a tweet they made arrangements with Wine to access his lawyers on Tuesday, but they claimed he refused to meet them. In a press briefing on Wednesday, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Sam Kutesa, said the conduct of some of the presidential candidates was in open defiance of the Electoral Commission's guidelines. Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor for United States President-elect Joe Biden, described the house arrest as deeply concerning on Sunday. On Saturday, the U.S. State Department called for authorities to address election irregularities. The United States ambassador to Uganda, Natalie E. Brown, was blocked by Ugandan security forces from visiting presidential candidate Bobi Wine on Monday. Uganda's internet shutdown was described by NetBlock's founder Alp Tokayer as a textbook case of premeditated, pre-election internet blackout, as connectivity was restored after 5 days. This impeded the work of journalists, observers, and party agents, said the EU ministers. The internet shutdown was needed to stop the vitriolic language and incitement to violence, said the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in a tweet on Wednesday. Al Jazeera has also come out with an article on the same illegal detention of Bobi Wine at his home, Al Jazeera says. Bobi Wine files arbitrary detention complaint at UN. The opposition leader has been under de facto house arrest by security forces in Kampala since Friday. Ugandan opposition leader Bobi Wine, who is under de facto house arrest by the military, has filed an arbitrary detention complaint to the United Nations. Nigerian human rights lawyer Femi Falana has filed this complaint on my behalf to the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Arrest. "We are challenging my continued illegal confinement by the Ugandan police and the military," he tweeted on Wednesday. Bobi Wine's residence in Kampala has been surrounded by the army since Friday, a day after Uganda conducted presidential elections in which Bobi Wine competed against President Yoweri Museveni. Longtime President Museveni, 76, was re-elected with almost 59% of the vote, followed by 38-year-old Bobi Wine, with roughly 35%. The opposition leader, whose real name is Robert Kyagulanyi, said he will legally contest the result of the presidential election, alleging widespread fraud during the January 14 polls, seen as Uganda's first election in which there was a real threat to Museveni's rule. Museveni, one of Africa's longest-serving leaders, has retained power for 35 years. He changed Uganda's constitution to enable himself to run for yet another 5-year term. The election had been overshadowed by violence since campaigning began, with almost daily violence. The internet was shut down across the country shortly before the start of voting. It has since returned, though social media remains unavailable. On Thursday, Human Rights Watch said the lead-up to elections were characterized by widespread violence and human rights abuses. A democratic playing field for free and fair elections was worryingly absent during these elections, Oriem Nico, Africa researcher at Human Rights Watch, said. Instead of restricting free expression, movement, and assembly, the Ugandan government should take concrete steps to improve respect for human rights for all and remove all remaining restrictions, Nico added. Amnesty International has called upon Ugandan authorities to lift the police and military siege of opposition leader Kyagulanyi, Museveni in a direct message says. Uganda, end politically motivated detention of Robert Kyagulanyi and his wife. The Ugandan authorities must immediately lift the police and military siege of opposition leader Robert Kyagulanyi's home and release him and his wife Barbara Itungo Kyagulanyi. This is an arbitrary detention, said Amnesty International, as the post-election blockade entered its 7th day. Robert Kyagulanyi, also known as Bobi Wine, was declared runner-up by the Electoral Commission in last week's presidential election, with 34.8% of the vote behind President Yoweri Museveni, who it said got 58.6%. Bobi Wine and his National Unity Platform (NUP) party have alleged fraud. Robert Kyagulanyi and his wife Barbara Kyagulanyi are being held under house arrest without being presented before a judge and for a non-cognizable offense. This is also having an impact on his ability to challenge the presidential election results, in what appears to be a ploy to prevent the NUP from going to court in time, said Deprose Muchina, Amnesty International's regional director for East and Southern Africa. It is neither a crime to stand for president nor to want to challenge the election results in court. This continued confinement is politically motivated and a blatant violation of their human rights. It must be lifted immediately and without any conditions. Security personnel are also preventing people from accessing Robert Kyagulanyi despite him having reported that his family has run out of basic needs, including food. On January 18, the security personnel stationed outside his house prevented the U.S. Ambassador Natalie Brown from visiting Kyagulanyi's residence, where she had gone to check on his health and safety, according to a statement issued by the U.S. Embassy in Uganda on January 18. On the same day, security forces also raided the headquarters of the NUP party. This is not the first time the Ugandan government has used arrests and detention to undermine opposition leaders' plans to legally challenge presidential election results. During the 2016 election, the leading opposition presidential candidate at the time, Kizza Besigye, was barricaded in his home without charge the day after polls closed. He was later transferred to a police station when he rejected the presidential election results, declaring President Museveni's re-election and suggested that he would challenge them in court. Then, as now, the authorities termed their actions preventive arrest. Police spokesman Fred Inanga has been quoted in the media as saying Robert Kyagulanyi was placed under preventive arrest as he planned to disrupt public order, but he did not specify what crime was being planned. More than a week now after he was placed in house arrest, the authorities have yet to present any charges against him. The Ugandan government must immediately end the arbitrary detention of Robert Kyagulanyi and his wife. They must also cease and desist from the abusive practice of arbitrarily detaining opposition leaders without charge, which has become routine, especially during elections, said Deprose Muchina. According to the Presidential Elections Act, aggrieved presidential candidates must lodge their petitions in the Supreme Court registry within 10 days of the declaration of the election results. This means Robert Kyagulanyi and the NUP party have until January 26 to file an election petition. Campaigning for the 2021 elections was marred by killings, arrests, beatings and disappearances, as well as harassment and intimidation of journalists and a 5-day internet shutdown, among other human rights violations. At least 54 people were killed on 18 and 19 November, most of them shot dead by police and other members of the security forces after protests broke out following the arrest of Robert Kyagulanyi in the eastern Luka district. Many organizers and supporters of Robert Kyagulanyi's party were arrested during and after Election Day, and a number of them remain behind bars, some even after they were granted court bail. Visit this channel, JB Muwonge on YouTube, for all the articles translated.